Hello and welcome back. I hope everyone had a fun and safe New Year's Eve. I know some guys in the Data Draft Discord group didn't because they were blowing up the chat last night. But as we put 2022 to bed, we take a look ahead to 2023, and more specifically in this video, we look at the Week 13 fantasy schedule to help you maximize your ads this week and get you the W. So, as we always do, let's just jump right into the schedule. And Week 13 is a return to normal. So 7 teams play 4 times, 3 teams only play twice. So you can see Buffalo, Ottawa, San Jose play twice. So if you have any waiver eligible guys that you picked up in the last couple weeks, you could probably drop them. You're going to want to hold on to Tage Thompson, obviously. Anybody who has exposure to him, so Jeff Skinner, Alex Tuck is probably a hold. You might even hold Cousins because he's been phenomenal. He had a nice overtime winner yesterday, but anybody else you could potentially drop. Now, the schedule breaks down like this. It's 3 games on Monday, 11 Tuesday, 3, 10, 6, 9, and 8. You can see that right here. And the light nights are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, not Sunday. Sunday's got 8 games, so you will be able to find something there, and we're not necessarily going to cover the Sunday ads in this video because of that. But there is one team that plays Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, and that is the Anaheim Ducks. So who can you target from the Ducks? Over the last month, only 2 players from the Ducks are near the top 100 in fantasy, and those 2 are listed here. So Mason McTavish was Yahoo rank 100, Frank Vatrano 105. So McTavish, 16% owned, center left wing, dual eligible. He's started to get his game together. He's got 9 points in his last 14 games, 5 on the power play. So yeah, that's a typo. Frank Vatrano, 7% owned, dual eligible, left wing, right wing. He's got 8 points in his last 14 games, and his shot volume is usually targetable. He's usually over 3 shots per game. I've mentioned that in the previous video, I believe last week. But he's a guy who only gets shots and gets some goal production. But he's got 8 points in his last 14, and believe it or not, that's something to make note of because nobody else is doing anything in Anaheim. Then you also have Simone Benoit. If you're looking for a hits and blocks D, in a deep league, you typically want a guy who's going to be playing 4 times because you'll make a lot more in volume than you would with a guy on a 2 or 3 game week. So if you need that 4 game week with a hits and blocks D, Simone Benoit over the last 2 weeks, 3.33 hits per game, which is really targetable. Now, again, if you look at the goaltending at the bottom down here, the save percentage is pretty good, 9.26 and a 9.15. But you pretty much should never own Ducks goalies, period. So in this span, this is the last 2 weeks, the Ducks are averaging 45 shots against per game. You heard me right, 270 shots against in 6 games. So if you're in a points league with total saves, then these guys become ownable because they'll put up 15 to 20 points in a loss with these shot numbers. But any other league format, I don't want to touch these guys with a 10-foot pole just because of the horrible team defense. And that's something that I mentioned in the 2022 recap video, Don't Target John Gibson. I was saying that early in the season because of the poor team defense. Dostal's actually playing pretty well with a 9.26, but his goals against average is pretty high, and he's only got 1 win in that span. And then, the total saves is just insane, the shots against. So yeah, don't target Anaheim goaltending. Back at the schedule, you notice the second best schedule is Boston, and they have an extremely favorable matchup in every game this week. So they've got the Winter Classic against Pittsburgh, and they've been bleeding goals a little bit lately. They've got LA, who's 24th in team goals against. They've got San Jose, who's 31st, and then Anaheim, who's dead last. So they have some favorable matchups, and obviously they are the best team in the league for a reason. So who can you target from the Bruins? Well, the number 1 target this week would be this second line, which starts with Pavel Zacha, 4% owned, 3 position eligible, which is always valuable because you can maximize your roster for the week and get him in every game. 4 points in his last 6, 2 goals, 2 assists, and he's on that line with Krejci and Pastrnak, which is exactly why you'd want to target him. He also gets power play 2 time as well. He had a 17-game goal drought, but he ended that recently, so maybe he's going to start to score some goals and get that going. But even in that 17-game stretch, he had 11 assists, so he was still productive during that time span. Now, this is probably a deeper league play for most people, but in a 4-game week with weaker defensive opponents, this is a perfect time to go out and try to target Pavel Zacha, even if you're in a shallow league. But speaking of this line, I've been saying it for a while. If Krejci is available, go grab him. He's got 9 points in his last 12. He's assist heavy for sure, but he does get it done on the power play. and he's averaging 2 shots per game. If you look at his season-long player hub, he's averaging just under a point per game, which is really good. 89th percentile in goals per game, 90th in assists per game. The power play numbers are really good. 92nd percentile there, 0.35 power play points per game. He doesn't shoot, which is a little rare or weird considering the fact that he's playing with Pastrnak, who could set him up for a number of goals if he actually just shot the puck a little bit more. Doesn't hit a lot, but gets a couple blocks here and there. So he's a guy that I've streamed a couple times this year. He's always pretty reliable. He's going to get you something on any given night, and then any given night with the guys that he's playing with, he could go off for a couple points, 2-3 points, a couple on the power play as well. There isn't much else to talk about when it comes to Boston, and because of their big dogs, they're the ones that get it done. But if Jake DeBrusk or Taylor Hall are there, you should probably go and pick them up. I prefer DeBrusk over Hall. Never really been a fan of Taylor Hall in general or fantasy-wise, though he does have elite-level production for a third liner with 27 points in 36 games. And I've mentioned this player for this exact reason before, but Connor Clifton is a consistent hitter. He gets decent blocks coverage as well, and he does chip in every now and then with some offense. And you can see here a goal and 2 assists, 3 points in his last 6, averaging 2.79 hits per game and 1.21 blocks per game. So he's a guy that you could target for the hits and blocks coverage, but then also get a little bit of offensive production as well. In this week, they will probably play Swayman on the second night of a back-to-back. I was going to mention him because his numbers were improving a lot over the past couple weeks, but then he threw a stinker in there against Buffalo the other night, and his .840 save percentage brought everything down. He's now a .905 over the last month, so it wasn't quite good enough to highlight here, but obviously if he's available in your league, you're getting excellent team defense exposure. Now, I don't know if I've covered Toronto in a weekly video in a long time, but it does seem a little bit odd not to talk about one of the best teams in the league as well. And we just talked about line assignment with Boston, and the same goes for Calle Jarnkrok, who's getting the garden seat with Tavares and Marner on the second line. Since he's been there, he's on a 5-game heater, 7 points in those 5 games, and he's even gotten some power play time and picked up his first power play point on the season. So as long as he's on this line and or on this streak, I would ride this wave, but be aware that when this is over, he is fantasy irrelevant. So you see here, this is his player hub before this week. He was a 36th rating. He didn't do anything. He had a couple of goals, and that got him into the 73rd percentile for goals. But other than that, doing almost nothing. Then he has a great week, and that's what that can do to your player hub, because this is all percentile. So he's his well over a point per game in this span, and that bumped his point totals, his goal totals, etc. Got that power play point in there, which means that he's better than 60% of the league, because a lot of the league doesn't get power play time. So that's something that you can target. He's only 15% owned. And then similarly, now this isn't a line assignment play, but Pierre Engvall also on a 5-game point streak, 2 goals, 3 assists in that span, only 1% owned. So this is your deep league option, dual eligible winger. He's on the third line, so he's not on that garden seat, and he's probably not going to get bumped up anytime soon, but you could ride that heater as long as that's going on. But again, he's also fantasy irrelevant when this is over. Now, they're going to use both goaltenders at some point at the tail end of this, with Detroit and Philly on a back-to-back. They have an opportunity to win 3 out of 4 of these games at the very least. I mean, Seattle, that'll be a difficult game, but St. Louis, not the best defense, mid-pack defense in terms of Detroit, and then Philly's pretty porous as well. So any of these guys in this kind of a week, you're going to get some production out of them. Now, for the best of the rest, these are some targets from the teams that play 4 times, and if you're like me and you're trying to replace somebody longer term, you could start with this list. We'll look at Nick Ritchie. He was Yahoo rank 4 overall last week, and he's only 2% owned. So what's the reasoning? Well, he's on a 3-game point streak, 3 assists, 2 power play points in that span, but 15 hits in 3 games. That's 5 hits per game average, but it really comes on the back of a 9-hit game against Toronto, and I wonder why he wanted to go out and hit every Maple Leaf. But for the season, he's 94th percentile in hits with 2.69 per game and 87th percentile in power play points, which is rare. So typically with these hits forwards or D, you're looking to add another category on top of that. So they can't just hit, they have to do something else. And you'd never see a guy who hits and gets power play production. It's usually hits and goals, hits and shots, hits and blocks. but this is pretty rare that it's hits and power play points. So if you're in a points league that weights both of those categories with some weighting, whether you get an extra point and a half for a power play point, half a point for a hit or whatever, that makes him a little bit more valuable going forward. Now his but his teammate in Lawson Krause, they're together on the power play often. He's also on a 3-game point streak with 5 points in those 3 games, and he's dual eligible. And if you look at his player hub, he's 94th percentile in goals and 88th percentile in hits. So he's a hits guy who covers goals, which is a little bit more traditional. Kind of in that mold of a Tanner Jeannot, who's last year had 24 goals on the year and was like almost 4 hits per game. That's kind of what you're getting, a lot less hits in terms of Lawson Krause, but the goal production is really good. I believe that's close to a 30-goal pace over an 82-game season, and then you're getting a bunch of hits, and he covers a little bit of everything on top of all of that. So these are 2 hits options that you could pick up in a 4-game week to potentially get you some volume, especially if you're in a points league that weights goals and or power play points along with hits. But up next, we have Gus Nyquist, 2% owned, left wing, right wing, dual eligible. He's on not a 5-game point streak, but 5 points in his last 5 games. He had 1 game in there where he didn't pick up anything. He had a 2-goal game in his most recent game, 2 goals, 3 assists, 17 shots, 3.4 shots per game, which is really good for fantasy. He's moved up in the lineup with a lot of injuries that they've had, and with Patrick Laine missing time because of COVID protocol, which has been frustrating for me as a Laine owner. But as long as he's going to be on the top line, which he is now, playing with Gaudreau and whatnot, that is a nice line assignment for Nyquist. And again, he's only 2% owned, so you can probably go out there and pick him up. Now, his teammate, Marcus Bjork, who I honestly had no idea who he was, I had to look him up. He was recently quarterbacking the power play, which I did notice. But if you can see here, 92nd percentile in blocks, 82nd in power play points, but that was before Adam Boqvist came back, and Boqvist has taken over the power play 1 duties. So you do get power play 2 time with Bjork, but he's on the top defensive pair. So that's probably what you're going to look for is his time on ice and the fact that he's getting a lot of blocks, and those blocks will continue if he's going to get 16 to 20 minutes a game. Only 1% owned, and last week a goal and 2 assists, 1 power play point, 10 hits, 11 blocks in the last 5 games. So that's actually more than 1 week, but anyways, very impressive from Marcus Bjork, who I did have to look up just for this video. So the last but not least, we have 2 guys who are getting it done in Washington. Washington's another team that's banged up, a ton of injuries. Obviously, they're hoping to get some guys back, but some of those guys are closer than others. And in that absence, Connor Sheary, 7 points in his last 6 games, a goal, 6 assists, 14 shots. He's 12% owned. And even deeper, 2% owned, Marcus Johansson, 6 points in his last 6 games, and it's a little more even, 3 goals, 3 assists, 3 power play points. So if your league weights power play points a little bit differently, he's the guy to pick up out of these 2. And then also worth mentioning, Nick Dowd, 6 points in his last 6 games, 4 goals, 2 assists, 12 shots, and he's also 2% owned, but he's a center. And there are usually other good center options available on the wire, which is why we highlighted these 2. But these guys, in a 4-game week, they can potentially add some volume. If you're looking to stuff a couple of categories, or if you're looking to pick up a guy for the entire week, this is a good place to start. Now, as we turn to the Week 13 goalie ads, the best goalie ad this week undoubtedly is Antti Raanta. And for absolutely no apparent reason, Rod Brind'Amour has given him the net, despite Kochetkov dominating in the absence of Freddie Anderson. So Kochetkov is still 71% owned. I would still target him. In fact, somebody in one of my leagues dropped him, and I put a waiver claim in on him. But Raanta is starting games, and over the last 2 weeks, he's Yahoo ranked 4 overall. He's the second best goalie behind Ilya Sorokin in that span. He's got 4 starts, 4 wins, 2.0 goals against, and a .921 save percentage with 2 shutouts. And you absolutely want exposure to the Canes defense, as they're the hottest team in the NHL right now after winning 10 straight. But obviously the Canes, they're a very hot team, but so is Washington. So up next we have Charlie Lindgren, and although Darcy Kemper's back, Lindgren's earned his starts with the way he played when Kemper was out. So over the last 2 weeks, his numbers are still great, and Washington's on fire right now. They're 11-2 in their last 13 games, despite all the injuries. They do have a favorable schedule this week and next week as they face Buffalo, Columbus, Nashville, and then the Flyers twice. So you could potentially hold on to him for a couple of weeks if you have to. And a bunch of winnable games against teams that don't have great offenses, with Buffalo being the main exception to that. Now, up next, we have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and I highlighted both Sabres goalies last week and went to my league and grabbed Craig Anderson, and he was the guy that was in the top 100 in fantasy, and he had great numbers. It looked great, but he didn't get a single start. He might start today. I hope so because I desperately need him to start. But instead, UPL has carried the crease, and this week he put up great numbers. Over his last 4 starts, 4 wins, 246 goals against, and a .933 save percentage, and the Sabres are riding a 6-game winning streak that will be tested today against Ottawa. Unfortunately, they only played twice this week, but with the way that Don Granato has been dishing out the starts, UPL may get both of them, so that's why I highlighted him here. He's only 15% owned as well, so he's a little bit of a deeper league play. Now, the next guy I've been talking about for weeks, Philip Gustafsson, still playing well despite one bad game against San Jose. Even with that factored in, he has a .162 and a .934 save percentage and a shutout to boot in his last 5 games. Now, a couple weeks ago, I listed both of these goaltenders as potentially buy lows. Obviously, Gustafsson was a waiver pickup, but I was thinking of Fleury as a buy low trade target, and this was probably early December. And from that point on, since December 12th, Fleury is 4-1 with a .161 goals against and a .945 save percentage. So if you have Fleury, you could pair him with Gustafsson and reap the benefits of the Minnesota Wild playing well. And they are playing well. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. I don't want to necessarily attribute all of that to Ryan Reeves coming over, but I think that has made a difference. They're playing some good hockey, and Gustafsson's only 34% owned. So he's a definite G3 option for a lot of people out there because he's going to get you consistent production when he does start. And last but not least is a spot start for Scott Wedgwood on Wednesday night against Anaheim. So the Ducks are second worst in the league with 2.27 goals for per game, and Dallas is 7th best in the league in goals against per game. So this is a perfect matchup to start Wedgwood, who has been pretty good himself when he's played, 303 goals against and a .910 save percentage on the season. So this is an opportunity. Dallas has a back-to-back. I would assume they'll give Ottinger the first half of the back-to-back. I believe it's against Los Angeles, and then they'll start Wedgwood against Anaheim on Wednesday, and that's where you want to stream him for the night. He's only 6% owned, so he's going to be there for you. And again, this is a great matchup that you definitely want to take advantage of. Now, before we end the video, I did want to take a second to talk about Colorado. Now, their 2 best fantasy players last week were not Cale Makar. It wasn't Mikko Rantanen. It was these 2 guys at the top, JT Compher and Evan Rodriguez. You can see here 3 games, 5 points, 11 shots for Compher, dual eligible, 21% owned. Rodriguez, 3 games, 4 points, 2 goals, 2 assists, and 11 shots, and he's 3 position eligible and only 12% owned. Now, this is great if you've owned them so far, but you may be wondering what happens now that Mackinnon is back. Well, both of these guys slot in on the second line, currently with Logan O'Connor, and Rodriguez stays on power play 1 while Compher centers power play 2. So that may be the distinction between the 2 players, as they're both pretty good. You can see down here, Compher pretty complete. Same with Rodriguez, and again, the 3 position and then 2 position eligibility is pretty valuable in fantasy. But there is one other thing that I wanted to address, and that is Artturi Lehkonen. So his ownership was in the high 70s, low 80s at the beginning of the season, but that's dropped off along with his production. You can see before the Mackinnon injury, 5 goals, 8 assists, 13 points in 15 games, 0.86 points per game, and a lot of that was on the power play. Since McKinnon went down with injury, he's averaging half a point per game. So 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points in 10 games. But as we know, McKinnon is back, and apparently Nichushkin and Landeskog aren't close to returning. So Lehkonen will continue to get that spot on PP1, and his production will likely increase going forward. Now, someone in my league dropped him, and I put a waiver claim in on him, and we'll see what happens. But if he's there in your league, I'd suggest that you go and grab him before he starts to produce like he did at the beginning of the year. And he's 60% owned, so he may be available for you in some leagues. Now, if you look at where he's rated, he's not that much lower than Nathan MacKinnon in terms of his completeness. with leagues that have hits and blocks. So obviously we do have the player hub available in the Patreon link in the description below. We do have a version of this that doesn't have hits and blocks, so he would factor a little bit differently in leagues with without hits and blocks. But if you're in one of those leagues, I do have a player hub that doesn't have hits and blocks in it, but this one does, and he's a pretty complete player. You can see he does get 1.22 hits per game, almost 1 block per game, and then he's 95th percentile in power play points. So that's what's going to carry him, especially if you're in a points league that weights power play points a little bit heavier. That's a guy to target for sure. And this is a perfect buy low opportunity right now with the Colorado Avalanche getting healthier. But that's going to do it for this video. Again, if you want any of the player hubs used in this video, you can get them for yourself in the Patreon link in the description below. Be sure to like and subscribe, as it lets more people see this video in their feed and helps me a lot as well. Follow Data Draft on Instagram at data_draft. But that's going to do it. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.